Okay, all right. Welcome everyone. This is the third workshop held by the Writing and Academic Resource Center. And today we are going to talk about how to write a literature review, right? As a part of your senior project or master thesis dissertation, you are expected to write, right? And literature review is one of the main components of your research. So let's unmute ourselves. Oops, mute ourselves. And so let's get started. Can everyone see the screen? Okay, perfect. Thank you so much. So today's topic is devoted to literature review, right? And we will specifically be talking how to write a literature review. And my name is Khiratman Sheraliyev, a work coordinator. Today present with Maria Antonova, right, the work director. So to begin with, I want to ask a question. What is a literature review? How do you understand literature review? So you can raise your hand and or just jump in and talk, or you may use chat. Yeah, so how do Okay, go ahead. Fakhrullah. Fakhrullah, you may. Okay, thank you. Who is talking? Okay, Daniel.
So literature review is a list of peer-reviewed sources that we use for our work, for our paperwork. Is that correct?
So you said literature review is a list of sources you may use for your research project.
Not particularly used, but the literature review is the list of sources that we discovered prior to writing our work in order to come up with the research question and the hypothesis.
Okay, yes, pretty close. When it comes to list of sources, right? So literature review includes sources, different kind of sources about your topic. But I assume you are talking more about annotated bibliography. But that's pretty close. Thank you so much, Daniel. Anyone else? Denise.
Using it to depict state of the art, to show what is exactly happening in the field. And this also helps us to demonstrate the gap which we are trying to fulfill with our research.
Yes, exactly. Yes, that's the answer. So literature review is a comprehensive summary of previous research on a topic that you have, right? So it's a comprehensive, deeply summary of previous research in the field of your study and specifically about your topic. And in other words, it's the summary of what others have already studied and found about your topic, right? Good. Thank you so much. The next question, what is the purpose of a literature review? Why do we have literature review in thesis, right? Thesis, senior thesis and dissertation, and almost in all kind of research-based writing. So what is the purpose of a literature review? Danyar?
To find a gap in the others' research in order to find the gap and find a research question for your thesis.
Exactly, to identify the gap in the literature, right? The question or questions that have not been addressed at all or effectively. Okay, others? Anyone else?
Oh, sorry. Did you hear me?
Or not? Okay, now we hear you.
Okay. I think that the purpose of the literature review also for the reader. Somehow it's part of the introduction that also discloses important parts of our project. So it's easier for those who are not the professionals in the field to understand what's going on.
Yes, so that's also important for the writer, right? The person who is having a particular project to deepen his or her knowledge about a particular topic. Yes, exactly. So let's get started. So the purpose of the literature review. So a literature review accomplishes several key tasks. And the first is that it provides an overview of previous scholarship related to your topic, right? Or in other words, what other scholars before you have found and have written about your topic. The second, it engages critically with that scholarship. It's not just you write the summary of previous sources, right? Findings about your topic, but you critically engage, you evaluate these sources. And then, as was mentioned before, gap, right? So you identify the gap in the research, and the literature review shows your reader what your research will add to this gap, right? So how your research will contribute to the particular topic. So before you begin, so we need to make sure that you have a good, solid research question. So research question is very important before you start your literature review, right? Because without research question, you won't have a direct path, right? You don't have a direction for the project. So that's why you need to make sure that you have a good, solid research question before you move to the literature review part. So if you don't have a research question, or if you are not sure about your research question, then you can take the picture of these 3 QR codes about the previous workshops conducted by the work, and then you can check them out. For example, the first workshop here is about a research question, right? On how to come up with a good research question and how to identify that your research question is good enough. And the second is about finding scholarly sources, right? Reliable and relevant sources. And the third is about plagiarism, right? How to paraphrase, how to cite, and how to avoid plagiarism. So now you can take a picture of these three QR codes, and you can go always and have a look at previous workshops about these topics. And we move on. So now let's talk about the structure of a literature review. So, and the first thing comes introduction, but that's optional. That's not mandatory, right? So introduction includes a brief reintroduction of the focus in your research, right? So here you briefly reintroduce the focus of your research, what you are focusing in. And then the second is summary and comparison. So here you need to respond to the following questions. What have other scholars said about this topic? What other methods have been applied? And how do these ideas and articles relate to each other? So you read and you write about others' findings, right? Others' claims about your topic. And then you need to take into account the methods that have been applied to come up with certain conclusions or to find something. And in addition to this, you need to categorize, right? So you need to see how these ideas and articles relate to each other, how they are connected. And then you have analysis part, which requires you to answer the following questions. Do you disagree with any of the conclusions that other scholars have made? Do you think that their methodology was flawed, right, was weak? Is there an aspect of the topic that has still not been studied well? So gap, right? So in this part, you critically engage with the sources. And then the last one is conclusion. So you restate your research question in light of your analysis, right? So you reintroduce your research question and you need to show the gap, right, that you have found in the literature review, and you need to show how you will add to this gap with your project. So that's so basically the structure, right, varies across the disciplines and the departments, but that's kind of the standard structure for a literature review. Okay, so before you begin to write a literature review, so you need to make a list of key words and phrases. And it helps you to find relevant sources, right? And then as you read those sources, you need to summarize and analyze those materials that you find. And what is more important, you need to decide on groupings. So you need to identify which sources are most relevant. So which will you include and which will you exclude, right? And you can also can take into account chronological, right? For example, if studies on your topic, have been changing over time, then you need to make a record of events, right? For example, in 1920, right, these scholars believed that something. However, in early 1985 or something, the idea has changed and this happened, right? So you need to take this into account. And while grouping, you need to also take into account thematic part of it, right? So you need to take into account the particular subject, right? That comes from the literature, right? For example, your topic is being analyzed from economic perspective, right? Or politics or sociology or something. And then also methodological thing, right? So you need to identify and you need to make categorize what kind of methodologies have been applied previously by other scholars. So this being said, now we move to the main parts of literature review. And so as introduction was optional, right? And then the second, and I would say the most important thing is summarizing sources. As it was mentioned before, right? A literature review is a comprehensive summary of previous studies on your topic. So you need to focus on these three main questions here. While you summarize, you need to respond to the following questions. The first is, what do earlier scholars conclude? What data have they found that is relevant to my topic? And what methodologies did they use? And what key terms or special vocabulary are relevant to my topic, right? So the role of language. And for this part, you may use the key phrases like previous research has shown that something, something, or a particular author argues that something, something, or author's findings suggest that blah, 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 or particular author concludes that blah, 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 or prior studies have demonstrated that. Many studies have examined something, something. Earlier researchers have applied particular methodology to this topic, right? Or some scholars have found that something, something. So you can use these key phrases to summarize the previous sources. And then, you know, it somehow guides and leads you to the road. And then the next is comparing and contrasting sources. So for this part, you need to focus on how are authors' ideas, conclusions, and approach similar and different. Are there debates surrounding this topic? Are there different schools of thought into which authors can be divided? So, so here you compare, right, the differences and similarities between among authors, right? And then you can use the following key phrases on comparing and contrasting. So when it comes to similar positions, right, you may say both author 1, author 2, and author 1, author 2, right, agree that something, something, or similarly, or author of study 1's findings support author of study 2's claim that, and then you explain. Or when it comes to contrasting, right, so we have different positions, then you can use scholars disagree on something, or studies on particular topic offer conflicting results. There is no currently no consensus on something. Or unlike author of study 1, author of study 2 argues that, right? Or by contrast, other scholars have found that. So you can use these key phrases to compare and contrast different authors' findings and conclusions about your topic. And analyzing sources. So you need to focus on what are the potential biases of the authors, right? You need to examine if the authors can be biased or not. Or is a particular group under or overrepresented in the data? Are their survey or interview questions biased? Do they interpret their data correctly? Do you disagree with any of the conclusions that other scholars have made? Do you think that their methodology is flawed, is weak? Is there an aspect of the topic that has still not been studied? Right? So in this part, you critically engage with the sources for your research project. And here are the key phrases that you can use. Author does not consider something, or the author fails to account for something. Author assumes that, and then you explain, or you will say something are over or underrepresented in the sample, or author's claim is not supported by the evidence, or author's theory is not consistent with subsequent research, right? So you evaluate the sources that you have or you have found regarding your topic. And yes, and here we have identifying gaps in the body of scholarship. That's very, very important, and that's often challenging for students. So here you need to focus on what can you add to the scholarly conversation, right? So you need to identify what is missing in the scholarship. And are there any gaps in the body of existing scholarship, right? And can you apply existing methods, theories to a new case, which will be your case, right? You select certain phenomena or certain case, and then you will see if you can apply the existing methods and theories to a new case. And for this part, you may use the following key phrases. However, little is known about something, or something is understudied, right? Not effectively studied or examined, or something remains poorly understood. In the literature, it is still not known how, what, and why something happens. Scholars have yet to examine, or these ideas have never been applied to. One area that has not been researched is something, or building up on earlier scholarship, I will, right, focus on this gap or these gaps. Okay, so that's for the structure part. And now I would like to ask Maria to elaborate on one grammar point.
Okay, I'll be happy to do so. So the one thing, I will probably share my screen here if you don't mind.
Okay.
Yeah. So the one grammar point that is seems like a minor point, but basically it is very important for us to keep in mind, because honestly, it drives professors crazy. And when that is, so we have a question, for example, right? What do, for example, successful students have in common, right? So it's a question, and therefore it is phrased as such, right? But when we fold it into a sentence, for example, this paper focuses on what, and what do we say next? What successful students have in common, right? So we do not, as you can see, we do not, that we lose that do, right? Because this is not a question, right? It's a statement, right? And therefore you do not focus it, you do not phrase it as a question, you phrase it as a statement, right? Or, for example, what factors have influenced what factors what factors have influenced population growth in the fastest growing countries, right? So when you fold it into a question, you then you don't have to change it, right? So for example, this author aims to study what factors, etc., right? So, and there is obviously a period at the end, right? So, or how do government regulations prevent corporations from polluting water, right? So, and we can say, for example, that I plan to study. Can somebody continue? Can somebody make this an indirect question? I plan to study how? Government regulations prevent corporations from polluting water, right? So that is a minor point, but it is very important when you are writing a literature review, because you're constantly dealing with other people's questions and your own as well, right? And so, but you're folding them into a sentence, so don't, so do not phrase them as questions if they are not questions, okay? And this is something that a professor who actually works with seniors a lot talked to me a couple of years ago. She said, could you please make sure that students know how to phrase an indirect question? So I'm passing that wisdom on to you.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you so much. Yes, so here we have two types of questions, right? Direct questions and indirect questions. And when it comes to research projects, right? Here you are encouraged to use indirect questions, which means that you will use a regular word order, not in inverted word order. So when it comes to regular word order, you don't put direct questions, right? For example, why does this happen? Why does this particular phenomenon happen? So instead, you say, many scholars have tried to explain why this happens, right? So the verb does not come before subject. So first subject and then verb. Or is this method effective? Instead of this, you can write, scientists don't know how, don't know if this method is effective, right? So first verb and then subject. Or how does this pollution affect mental health? So that's a direct question. So when it comes to indirect question, then it sounds like this paper will examine how pollution affects mental health. So that's a grammar point that you need to take into account. Okay, so this being said, now we move on to the next part of the presentation, which is reviewing the sample, the literature review sample, right? And as I mentioned before, literature review can take different structure, but those elements that we talked about, right? Summarizing, contrasting, comparing, identifying the gap, or showing the focus of your research, these elements are still vital and they should be in the literature. But then the structure might vary across the disciplines. So now let's have a look at this sample. So the literature review begins like this. The biological, psychological, and social effects of stress on an individual have been researched extensively over time. Only recently has literature begun to focus on the influence stress that has on young people during the vulnerable stage of adolescence. So here we have the opening that explains the state of the research and its change over time, right? So the researcher, the author is explaining that only recently, right, the literature began to focus on the influence of stress on young people. And then next, at the end of the first paragraph in the literature review, we have the following statements. This paper will specifically focus on the types of life stressors young people encounter and the coping strategies they implement. Also to be examined is how adolescent stressors and coping strategies differ to that of adults. Through review of relevant coping literature, the notion of coping as a dynamic process will be emphasized. Okay, who can make a guess? What is this part about? What is the author trying to put here? Anyone can make a guess? Prediction. Okay, or purpose, or in other words, the focus of the research, right? So here we have explanation of the thesis focus. What we can expect, right? Prediction. What can we expect from the literature review? Okay. And then next we have the following. So this group of scholars, right? Mavluda, can you mute yourself? Thank you so much. Okay, let me. Okay, so this group of scholars explain stress using a biopsychological approach, suggesting that stressful reactions affect the emotional, psychological, and cognitive state of an individual. This definition describes stress as a reaction. Alternatively, another group of scholars, right, view stress as a discrepancy. And then next we have another group of scholars, Compass, Connor Smith, Saltzman, suggest that coping focuses on achieving goals to resolve a stressful situation and minimize emotional reaction. Similarly, Delahage and others describes coping as a relationship between cognitive and behavioral process that attempts to lessen the resources demand and discrepancy. Okay, can anyone make a guess? What is happening here? Yes, exactly. So different point of views, right? Or in other words, compares and contrasts. How key terms have been defined by different scholars at different times, right? So here we have alternatively, right? Or similarly. So here we have comparing and contrasting between the authors. Okay, so moving on. Then we have this data was based on a sample of adolescents aged 12, 13 years. Thus, it is possible to stressors could differ to those encountered by an older sample. This article is also relatively dated. Therefore, it is possible that the types of stressors prevalent today have changed. Anyone can make a guess what is happening here? Okay, yes. Here we have the method, right? Data collection. But what is the author trying to put? What is he or she doing? Okay, Daniar.
It explains here that the conclusion or the idea that has been stated in this topic may be already irrelevant. Thus one.
Okay, yes, exactly. So here we have the evaluation, right? Analysis. So the author, the one who is writing this literature review, is critically analyzing past scholarship, evaluating the data collection method, right? Saying that, well, the stressors could differ to those encountered by an older sample. And also the type of stressors prevalent today have changed. Okay, great. Thank you so much. Okay. So next. So it's a bit long. Okay, so Persike and Safety Krenke concluded a multicultural analysis of adolescent stressors and found that academic achievement and parental control were of most concern. Will's anxiety about peers and relationships was less than expected. Similar to the Anda and others, and Sprito and others, Persic and other scholars suggest that adolescents are increasingly concerned about school, future employment, and further education. Comparisons of these studies indicate that time has not significantly altered the types of stressors adolescents experience. The highly influential work of Lazarus, 1966, as cited by Folkman, Tedley and Moskowitz emphasized the role of cognitive interpretation in both stress perception and coping. Okay, so what is taking place here in this part? What is the one thing that has not been found before in this example of literature review?
Is it he explained different methods that different scholar uses?
Yes. And what is this in one word?
Methodology.
But yes, and what is the author doing with this methodologies and these sources? Comparisons was before, but so here we don't have not analysis. Analysis was before. Here we have summaries. So the author is summarizing findings of past research in his or her own words, right? So the summary of previous works on the topic. And yes, and then we also have here compares findings of different studies and then explains the importance of a particular piece of research, right? Saying that, well, this particular work is highly influential in this area of study or research. Okay, so that was one kind of short example, but there are a lot of it. So you may go find examples of a literature review and then see, and other things to consider in addition to what we have discussed. As you take notes about sources, make sure that you are clearly differentiating your paraphrases from quotes. So when you read the sources about your topic, make it clear of the quotes that you write, right? And then the paraphrases that you make. And then you need to make sure that you use proper citation. And you should be consistent with one style, right? If you are using APA, then you need to stick with APA throughout your project. Or MLA, Chicago. And if you are stuck, then know that you don't have to write from the beginning to end. So try switching your attention to a different section that you are ready to work on, right? So if you're ready to work on summarizing, then do it. Or if you're ready to comparing the sources and contrasting, so go for it. And you can ask yourself, right? Can I talk with my advisor? Or maybe your peers can help you. And further resources. So you might know that we have examples of old student theses that are available on the library's website. And so for this, you need to go to elibrary.auca.kg and scroll down to senior thesis. And then there you log in with your AUCA account, and then you will have access to previous works. And also the resources for students page of the WARC's website contain a number of guides and examples for you to look at. So you may go to warc.auca.kg, resources for students, and then you will find so many materials about literature review and all other kind of things. And also, our YouTube channel includes writing resources, right? Previous workshops that have been conducted are available there. So you can go and have a look at them. And then you are always welcome to come to the work at any stage, right? Book sessions with our tutors, specifically writing ones, and then get some help. And yes, so you need to go to work.aca.kg to book a session. That's it. And now we open the floor for questions. Do you have any questions?
I was hoping you could clarify something for us, Hirad. And that is, at what stage of thesis writing does literature review happen? Like, so is it something that you do at the end after you finish your research, or you do it at the very beginning before you even start? Like where, you know, where does literature review fall in that timeline?
So first and foremost, you need to have a research question. So, but we may call it primary research question, right? Or initial research question, because over time, you may add something to your research question, or you may change a bit, but that's okay. And that's a part of the process. And it means that you identified something and you developed it, right? So first thing is you need to have a research question. So after the research question, then you can start working on literature review. So while you work on your literature review, you may find better gaps, right, in the literature, and then you may direct your research question to this gap or to these gaps. So in short, the literature review begins after developing a research question, so that you will have a direct kind of a direct path, right, to focus on, and then to find sources, and then to read, analyze, summarize, and deepen your knowledge. You are muted.
I said thank you. And there is a question in the chat, it seems.
Okay. How many paragraphs do we need to write for a literature review? Well, it is different depending on your requirements, right, from the department or from the project that you have. So I would say there is no specific requirement for the paragraph numbers, as long as you cover, right, the literature in scholarship, and you summarize, you contrast, you evaluate, you show the gaps, you are fine.
If I may add to this, so the literature review, right? I mean, honestly, it can be very, very long if you want to, but it doesn't need to be very long. All you need to do is to cover the literature that is relevant to your research question. So, for example, if you are in the field of education, obviously, you know, you cannot possibly cover all the literature related to education. That would not be possible. So that's why you need to cover the literature that is directly relevant to your research question, right? For example, when I was doing my research on the impact of peer tutoring on student success, right? my literature had to do with the definition, with the, with the context, with the definition of peer tutoring, with what constitutes success, and different methodologies for measuring success, right? So that was important for me to cover, right? So that is what you essentially do. You take, you say, so you ask yourself, what is important for, what important work has been done, has been done that pertains directly to my research question, and that's what you cover, right? In my case, it was 2.5 pages, right? You can spend more time. I mean, it could be more or less, but depending on how much there is on your research question. Has that answered your question? Okay. All right. Okay. So, do we have? Yeah.
Other questions?
Which part of the review gets more score? I'm sorry, Mavluda, you would have to, you'd have to clarify that question for us. I mean, how professors grade it, or which one is most important? Oh, well, I mean, all of it is important, really, because basically what you are doing, right, is you are about to start researching this question, and you need to show that you know what other people have done in that field, right? This is the summarizing, right? You also need to not just know what has been done, you have to be able to analyze what has been done, right? And you have to be able to indicate to your readers that your research is valuable, that that it somehow fills a particular gap in the scholarship, right? So if we're talking about summary analysis, right, and okay, all of it is important, right? All of it is important, but the one thing that I would say is most important is that you have to be able to prove that there is a need for this research, right? That you are doing something that other people haven't done before. So maybe they haven't done it in this context, or maybe they have not used this particular methodology, or maybe it wasn't done with this particular population. So that is really what counts, right? Because this is how you prove to your reader that your research isn't useless. How it's graded, that depends on your professor. Different professors weigh it differently. So how many sources should we analyze or read for writing a good literature review? Hira, do you want to take that?
Okay, so again, it depends on the scope of your topic, right? And it depends on the requirements that you have for your project, for your research project. Yeah, but I would say the more, the better. But then you need to make sure that your sources are relevant to your topic, right? And all those sources in some or other ways address your research question. And then when it comes to writing, right, putting things on paper. So here you need to be as short as possible, as specific as possible, and you need to make categorization, right, of others, their perspectives, their findings, their methodologies, and then you compare, you need to contrast, and more importantly, you need to summarize their findings, right, their perspectives, and their conclusions.
If I may add something,
Mhm.
we have a wonderful resource, and that is the work has a resources for students page, right? And there is a section called writing genres. And here you could see examples of different types of papers. Like, for example, there is a research proposal, and woo, look at this, there are examples of literature review, and they're even annotated for your convenience, right? So this is, this is something that you can take a look at, right? So of course, as Hirad has mentioned, you can take a look at examples of thesis, at examples of thesis that we have in our library of our students' thesis. But the problem, not the problem, but one of the issues is that you don't know which one is, which theses are you should be really using as a model, right? Because the level of performance is different, right? Here, however, if you look at this at our site, these examples have been curated. We try to select good examples. So you might want to look here and see, like I said, examples that you can pretty much emulate, that you can model your own work upon. Okay.
Another question, I'm sorry, can I ask, should we include contrast questions? Like, is it like, what if I don't have ideas, like contrast ideas? What if I couldn't find and in literature review?
I'm sorry, what do you mean? Like, if you couldn't find what?
If I couldn't find contrast ideas or points of view on the issues or my research project, is it okay if I not include the contrast ideas?
Conflicting ideas about the topic, like different perspectives and findings, she means.
Well, since you understood the question, go ahead and take it.
So, well, my assumption is that if you don't find conflicting, right, contrasting perspectives and ideas about your topic, your research question, then I would assume that your research question is not well developed, because you need to come up with the puzzle, right? And then this puzzle should be either covered partially, right, or not, but well, it's hard to find a puzzle that has not been covered. So, which means that in the literature, there must be different perspectives about your research question. So yes, so I think you always find, but in case if you don't find contrasting ideas, then you may just state that in the literature, all scholars, right, believe in one perspective or something that, and then you mention it. And yeah, and then I assume it works.
Normally, however, as Hirad just mentioned, you would be able to find different viewpoints, because it is, scholars never really agree on anything. Everybody tries to introduce their own viewpoint. So you will inevitably, especially if you know if you know what your research question is, if your research question is sufficiently narrowed down, you will be able to see the difference in people's viewpoint. Like, for example, something as simple as student success, right? Some people think that student success is grades. Some people think that student success is how they feel about themselves psychologically. Some people say that student success is how well they perform in the future after they graduate from university, right? So everybody has a different idea of what success is, and you will be able to see those differences.
Welcome. Any other questions? Okay. So I think with that we can conclude our workshop. So thank you all for coming and participating and engaging in the activities. So yeah, Maria, do you have something else to say?
I just wanted to say thank you.
Yes, thank you. And
Thank you, really, thank you.